How to get your mix on an Apple podcast. Let's jump in. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to get your mix on Apple Podcasts. Some of you already might have watched my how to get your mix on Spotify. I will link that in the card above. And this, I'm going to take that a bit further, and I'm going to look at how to get your mix on Apple Podcasts. Obviously, Apple Podcasts have been around for a long time, and one of the first podcasting platforms. And having a podcast on there is great for numbers these days. Podcasting have a real resurgence, and it's really easy to take your mix and put it on Apple Podcasts. So without further ado, let's dive into the computer, and I'll show you how to do it. Okay, so let's dive into the computer and set this podcast up in Apple Podcasts. First thing you're going to need is a host. I use SoundCloud because I'm already uploading the mix to my SoundCloud, and actually once you start getting streams on Apple Podcast, they then get added to your stream count on SoundCloud. So to do that, you are going to go into your settings. You're going to go into content, and you're going to set up the content in your RSS feed. Basically, the RSS feed is a big long file which basically tells Apple Podcasts where to find your MP3 for the file and what the information is about the podcast. If we copy and paste this and we stick it into our browser, you can see this is the NAF mix here. Title. This is where the file is, its length, and other things like the image and the owners and stuff. And basically, Apple Podcasts reads this file for all of them and converts these chunks of information into what it says as a podcast are. So go back into SoundCloud. To do this, you set up the title, date podcast, your name as the author, music, obviously if it's music. Make sure you put your email address, choose that as your email address, and then save those changes. You're then going to copy that link there, your RSS link, and you're going to take it to iTunes Connect. Do a Google search, iTunes Connect, and it'll come up, appstoreconnect.apple.com. And then you want to go into Podcast Connect. Basically, then you're just going to paste your feed, your URL feed, into here. And click the validate button. That'll then validate the podcast and take you into your podcasts. This is my podcast. It's validated, activated already, and I can see that it's got last refresh was a little bit ago, and that's my podcast. Essentially, that's on Apple Podcast. It's ready to go. It'll take a few days for it to start working. Save it, and then when it says active, it's active. You then will be able to view it on Apple Podcasts, and you can see here's my podcasts. And these are all the ones there's the NAF mix. You can see it's got this title, and if I click play, it'll basically go to SoundCloud and play that SoundCloud file. One thing I can say about using SoundCloud as a host, it takes your artwork here from the SoundCloud, your SoundCloud logo. So if you want to be more specific, it also takes all the information from SoundCloud. As you can see, it's not really formatted. This is the not so joys of using SoundCloud as a host. If you want it to look a bit neater and you want it to work a bit better, then I would suggest using someone like Libsyn or Podbean or Buzzsprout as your podcast host. You have to pay for these, and you pay depending on how much storage you use, and then you can be a bit more tailored. I'm trying to keep this on the cheap. Obviously, I'm already paying for SoundCloud. I'm already paying for SoundCloud Pro, and therefore I wanted to just distribute the podcast to as many platforms as possible using their RSS option, because it's essentially you're not paying any more. So that's creating the podcast. Once you're in the podcast, once you're in Apple Connect, you can then, if I go back, you can then there's analytics you can look at, which is in beta, and it's kind of they're updating that all the time. And you can add other podcasts. We've got a few on there. One for our radio shows, one for something I did a while back that's still active. Then finally, so once you've got that's the podcast created, what you can do with Apple Podcasts is if you want to You want to get people to leave customer reviews. You want to get them to rate the podcast, leave a review, and the more customer reviews you can get, and anyone that wants to, the link will be for this podcast will be below in the thing, and if anyone wants to start listening to it, you can go and listen to it from the link below. And also, if you fancy leaving me a rating, that'd be great. The more ratings you get and the more reviews you get, that pushes you up the chart in the Apple charts, in Apple Podcast program. So it's a good idea to try and get a load of them in one go. So announcing your podcast is going to happen, get the link for it, maybe do an intro podcast, which is only like a couple of minutes long, so you can drive people to your podcast page and get people rating it and adding new comments. Then you release your first option, and then that first mix will go up the chart quicker because it's got comments and ratings and reviews. Finally, when you want to add your podcast, when you want to add your next podcast, so then you upload to SoundCloud. Here's my Supernova one for this week. Let's go into the edit of it, as if we've just uploaded it. You go into the permissions and you choose include in the RSS feed. If this button's ticked, that means that mix is going to be included in the feed. And then you just save it, and then you can add, basically every time you upload a mix, you can add that one to the feed as well. So if I scroll down, I did another mix the other day. This one, Night Lapse. I don't think this one is in there. So if I go into here and edit this one, permissions, no, so that's not in there. So I'll include that in, save changes. Now that mix will now be included in my feed. What will happen next is, because I've saved that, my feed, if I refresh my feed will get updated, and then shortly, a little while after, when because what Apple Podcast does is it goes and checks the feed on every so often. It'll update what it finds in the feed, and then that'll appear in here, and that podcast will then be available. And you just continue doing that. I hope that's made a load of sense. Any questions, drop them in the comments, and I'll reply to them and help you out. Don't forget to go and get a license if you are doing this. I'll do another video on licenses shortly. Thanks again for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it. Comment below what you got out of it. If you need any further help, comment that below, and I'll dive into the comments and see if I can answer them for you and help you answer those questions. Thanks again for joining me this week. I've been Grahame Farmer. I'll see you again next time. Bye.